Hey, it's Pastor Quincy with Cuyahoga Falls Church of the Nazarene. I've just got a quick review for you here of episodes 3 through 5 of season 5 of The Chosen. I'm going to go into spoilers in this, so if you haven't seen the episodes, probably a good idea not to watch this video until you've seen the episodes. But for those of you who get the chance to go out and see it in theaters at some point, if you haven't seen it yet, bookmark this and come back to it. If you've seen the episodes, let's talk a little bit about what we see in this episode. Again, I enjoy the framing of the episodes that we're getting these pictures of the Last Supper and Jesus' disciples at the beginning of the episodes and sprinkled in a little bit throughout the episodes. A lot of the content here is found in John chapters 13 through 17. Very important to understand those passages and get in those passages. So I appreciate that the show is in. The show has committed to doing that. I really loved how these episodes dove into how do we figure out why the disciples didn't understand that Jesus was going to get crucified, even though he told them multiple times that he was going to get crucified. And so I thought the show did a really good job describing how they might come to that place. Jesus talks in parables a lot, so maybe this is a parable. Hey, maybe Jesus is kind of going to get crucified, but then rescue himself, save himself, and everybody will know at that point that he's conquered Rome, he's conquered his enemies, and then it'll be time for the Messianic age to begin. I think that's all very plausible explanations of how the disciples miss out on what Jesus is clearly trying to tell them. We get a lot of great scenes here that you have in the Gospels leading up to Jesus' crucifixion. Jesus' confrontation with the Pharisees, so incredibly well done. I love the disciples talking about how when Jesus cleared the temple, he didn't hurt anyone or hurt any animals. I think that's so important to understand. Jesus, he can be angry and he can do violent things, but he's not going to do violence upon someone else. I appreciated how they handled the Olivet discourse when Jesus talks about the end of the age, about the temple being destroyed. I think they kind of left it open-ended for a variety of interpretations, and I appreciate that. I'm of the mindset that almost everything Jesus says in the Olivet Discourse, which you can find prominently in Matthew chapter 24, but also a version of it in Luke and in Mark, that Jesus is talking to his disciples mostly about the destruction of Jerusalem and how they should prepare for that moment when the temple's destroyed and his people are exiled to the nations. But I do think that part of what Jesus says there does talk about a time coming when everything comes to an end that the Son doesn't even know, only the Father knows. And so I think they did a good job presenting that. And of course, we have the special surprise of Jesus hearing someone singing a psalm, and I'll have to go back and look exactly what psalm that is in our video study guides, which I'll be releasing when the episodes are free and available for everyone to watch. But Jesus looks and hears the psalm, and then he sees David. He sees David, and David disappears. I love this idea of a vision for Jesus, kind of to encourage him. These are the kind of people that you're saving. These are the kind of people that believe. A broken and fallen person David was, but he had a heart after God's own heart, and this is why Jesus is about to endure what he's about to endure. It is interesting that coming back to the story, this Greek myth with the Furies, and it obviously is relating to Judas and to Satan and what's going to happen to Judas. But we discover in this episode that the mysterious hooded figure, who I thought might be Satan, is not Satan. He is a servant, a relation, a connected person to Nicodemus, who is revealed at the very end of episode 5 to have sought out Mary Magdalene to talk to her about Jesus. Finally, Nicodemus is back in the picture. We knew he'd appear again. We know that he'll eventually connect with Yusuf, who will be revealed to be Yusuf of Arimathea. Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus are the ones who arranged for Jesus' burial eventually as secret disciples, secret followers of Jesus. So we see that coming into place. I think this makes pretty clear that this mysterious hooded figure, who we first ran into at the tomb of Lazarus and who we've seen throughout the city taking notes on what Jesus is doing and appearing, that he is eventually going to be revealed to be John Mark. And that's who he's going to be. Now, I had a mistake in my last video study guide. I had misheard the servant of the high priest's name. I thought they called him Marcus, and they called him Malchus, which makes sense. Malchus is the servant of the high priest who Peter chops the ear off of. So that eventually we're going to see that confrontation. All these pieces are coming into place. I like the idea of this person being John Mark a lot more than I like the idea of it being Luke, who I was thinking for a while it was, because really Luke isn't going to show up until after Paul converts Luke to being a disciple. I do think that the writers of the show really want to make clear that there were eyewitnesses of Jesus who were taking notes that eventually became the Gospels. I don't think that necessarily has to be the case for us to trust the Gospels. They were from eyewitness accounts. Luke wrote his from talking to eyewitnesses. So Matthew and John and Mark don't necessarily have to be taking all these notes while following Jesus. But the show's presenting us that, and it's a good image, I think, for people to think, well, there were people who actually cared about what Jesus said, keeping careful note of that, and I firmly believe that. I firmly believe that to be the case, so I'm fine with that little bit of leap and interpretive understanding. So we also have a great scene here. Jesus is telling the women to stay away from him for the next few days, trying to keep them safe. I'll be interested to see how involved the women become, because we know they were there observing his crucifixion. We know that they're the first ones to his resurrection. But I love Jesus taking the time to affirm each of them and their place in his kingdom. And I loved the women providing this liturgy of that would have been enough, speaking about how Jesus has affirmed them and their ministries before him. That was probably the most tear-jerking scene for me in these whole episodes. Haven't felt myself as emotionally moved to tears as I often am by The Chosen. I think that's just because I'm so familiar with the passages that they're putting right in front of me that I just kind of am overjoyed to see them unfolding in front of my eyes. But I know that next season there will be plenty of tears and moments of reflection like that. So those are some things that I noticed about the episode and some quick reactions and thoughts. I thought that everything was paced pretty well. It moved along quickly. I love how they're developing the betrayal of Judas and what the decision that Judas normally makes, that acting between Judas and Jesus in the scene where Jesus is asking for Judas's heart and Judas ultimately can't give it over to him. I thought that was amazing and a beautiful way to display the choice that Judas makes and how he ends up deciding this isn't the kind of Messiah that I want. And if it isn't the kind of Messiah I want, I'm going to force him to be the kind of Messiah that I want. And it'll be fascinating to see Judas eventually come to that place of remorse. The preview for the next episode looked pretty interesting. I'm surprised to see them going into the story of Ezekiel in the Valley of Dry Bones, but it looks like we're going to get some flashbacks maybe to Jesus seeing other famous figures from Scripture as he leads up to this most important day of his life and of human history.